Hello, I'm Jen Moore, Music of the Baroque's program annotator, and welcome to Baroque Notes, our virtual pre-concert lecture series. The end of a season is always a little bit bittersweet for me, but the final concerts of our 52nd season are thankfully a lot of fun. Dame Jane Glover created Circles of Friends from the music of four composers who really were friends and played string quartets together just because they wanted to. First violin, Joseph Haydn; second violin, Karl Ditters von Dittersdorf; violist, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart; and cellist, Johann Baptist von Hall. Tenor Michael Kelly provides the most famous account of one of these musical evenings around 1784. English composer Stephen Storris gave a quartet party to his friends. The players were tolerable. Not one of them excelled on the instrument he played, but there was a little science among them, which I dare say will be acknowledged when I name them. First violin Haydn, second violin Baron Dittersdorf, violoncello von Hall, viola Mozart. I was there, and a greater treat, or a more remarkable one, cannot be imagined. Haydn, Dittersdorf, Mozart, and von Hall were active in Vienna around the same time and connected in many ways. Haydn proclaimed Mozart the greatest composer known to me, either in person or by name. Mozart apparently performed von Hall's violin concerto in 1777, and Dittersdorf was von Hall's composition teacher. And Haydn's contemporary biographer, Griesinger, tells a great story about a rowdy night Haydn and Dittersdorf shared. Once, when Haydn was going through the streets in Vienna with Dittersdorf, they heard some Haydn minuets being played in a tavern. "We ought to have some fun with these bunglers," said one to the other. They went into the tavern, ordered a glass, and listened a while. "Who wrote these minuets anyway?" Haydn finally asked. They gave him his own name. "Ach, that's pretty miserable stuff," he exclaimed. At this, the musicians flew into such a rage that one of them would have broken his violin on Haydn's head if he had not speedily taken flight. I'm going to discuss the biographies of the composers who are perhaps less familiar, von Hall and Dittersdorf, and briefly discuss the difference between the Baroque Concerto Grosso and the classical Sinfonia Concertante. First, let's get to know von Hall. While his music is often compared to that of Haydn and Mozart, von Hall never achieved the same stature, perhaps partly because of a mental collapse he suffered around the time of the symphony in G minor's composition in 1770. Although he recovered, his colleagues characterized his later works as cold and lacking in passion. In 1772, historian Charles Burney found von Hall living in a garret in an obscure part of Vienna, concluding that his newfound sanity actually hindered his career. A little perturbation of the faculties is a promising circumstance in a young musician, and M.V. began his career very auspiciously by being somewhat flighty, wrote Burney, continuing, "But as insanity in an artist is sometimes nothing more than an ebullition of genius, when that is the case, he may cry out to the physicians that cure him, in Latin, 'Far from curing me, you have undone me.'" Von Hall's symphony in G minor is one of many minor key symphonies that strongly influenced the movement known as Sturm und Drang, or storm and stress. Music associated with this movement generally has melodies containing large, unpredictable leaps, pulsing accompaniments, and unpredictable changes in dynamics. From its very opening, von Hall's G minor symphony checks all the boxes. Now on to Haydn in the Sinfonia Concertante. At the invitation of concert promoter Johann Peter Salomon, Haydn made his first trip to London in 1791, the first year Salomon offered public concerts. Haydn's pupil Ignaz Pleyel was already enjoying great success in London with a rival concert series, and Haydn was worried. Now a bloody, harmonious war will commence between master and pupil. The newspapers are all full of it, but it seems to me that there will soon be an armistice because my reputation is so firmly established. Despite Haydn's trepidation, there was no animosity between the two men. As Haydn noted, Pleyel behaved so modestly toward me on his arrival that he won my affection again. Still, Haydn was not about to be eclipsed. Pleyel's concertos for multiple performers were extremely popular, and Haydn's Sinfonia Concertante for violin, oboe, cello, and bassoon was almost certainly a response and possibly at Salomond's request. Cultivated by composers including Karl Stamitz, Joseph Boulogne, and J.C. Bach, the Sinfonia Concertante takes the Baroque genre of the concerto grosso, a work for groups of soloists and orchestra, and pushes it into the era of the symphony and the concerto. Soloists and ensembles still work together, yet more independently than in the now unfashionable earlier form. I'm going to illustrate the difference quickly in a simple and somewhat crude way by playing you some music. Let's listen to a little of a concerto grosso by Handel, the Concerto Grosso Opus 6, number 9, published in 1739, the same year Dittersdorf and Van Hall were born. The soloist group consists of 2 violins. Listen to the quick alternations of the soloist group and the ensemble, which work in tandem to add contrast and therefore musical interest. Now, the first few minutes of the Haydn Sinfonia Concertante. The orchestral and solo groups are generally more well-defined, and the soloist group is on display much more prominently. We become aware of them as soloists, pointing the way to the increasing emphasis on technical virtuosity that became especially important in the 19th century. Finally, the composer on the program who wins the prize for best name, Karl Ditters von Dittersdorf. He was actually born Johann Karl Ditters in Vienna in 1739 and made a name for himself in the city's cultural scene at an early age. He held several important jobs with nobility, and when he himself was ennobled in 1773, he became known as Karl Ditters von Dittersdorf. Although he ultimately did not achieve the heights of fame he desired, he was well known in Vienna as a virtuoso violinist and composer. Little is known about Dittersdorf's 3 works for double bass, 2 concertos in the Sinfonia Concertante for viola and double bass. While it is generally accepted that they were written in the late 1760s for the double bass virtuoso Friedrich Pichelberger, There is no evidence to confirm this theory apart from Dittersdorf's autobiography, in which he mentions meeting the great Pichelberger in Vienna in 1765 and hiring him for his orchestra. The only existing manuscript of the Sinfonia Concertante on this program is a set of parts by an unknown copyist bearing the title Sinfonia in D a Contrabbasso e Viola. Dittersdorf places a double bass before the viola, perhaps indicating its more prominent role or the greater fame of the performer for whom it was written. One thing we do know is that Dittersdorf's music for double bass was written for what is in essence a different instrument. While the bass's muted sound and low register had relegated the instrument to the background, the 5-string Viennese violone used a special tuning that supported technical facility and made the instrument more resonant in certain keys. As Leopold Mozart commented, one can bring forth difficult passages easier with the 5-string violone, and I heard unusually beautiful performances of concertos, trios, solos, etc. on this instrument. Repertoire written for the Austrian violone is still performed today, but is notably more difficult on modern instruments. Principal double bass Collins Trier explains a tuning he will use to handle this complication when he and Liz Haydn perform Dittersdorf's Sinfonia Concertante.
Hi, I'd like to talk a little bit about the difference between normal orchestral tuning on the double bass and solo tuning on the double bass. Orchestral tuning is G, D, A, and E. And since most of us have extensions on our instruments, which is used in many symphonies of Beethoven, it goes down to a C, and sometimes a B, and often sometimes an A if it's long enough. With solo tuning, also called scordatura, which I'll be using with the Dittersdorf Concertante, it's tuned A, E, B, and F sharp, but since I'm using my extension, I'm leaving it at the pitch it's at, which means I'll have to transpose on this string 4 or 5 notes. We use solo tuning primarily to play the piece in the manner that the composer was wishing. The piece wasn't actually written for the orchestral double bass. It was written for an instrument that was smaller, had 5 strings, was tuned entirely different. So if we tune it a whole step higher, we can play it in a key which is more suitable for the composition. And it sounds like this.
Written in 4 movements like a symphony, the Sinfonia Concertante is meant to be entertaining for audience and performers alike. Let's listen to just a bit of the first movement. Thank you for joining me for the last Baroque notes of this season and the final performances of 22-23. I hope you're planning to join us for our 53rd season. I thought a little bit about what my personal favorites were, and I really can't pick one, but I did decide to come up with a few highlights for me. The exciting choral marathon that Dame Jane Glover has concocted for our season opening concerts at Symphony Center and the North Shore Center, featuring Bach's Magnificat and the Mozart Requiem. Getting to meet guest conductor Jonathan Cohen and violinist Victoria Malova for lots of Bach, plus Rameau and Lully in January. Tercentenary performances of Bach's St. John Passion in March. Nicholas Kramer's super fun orchestral program, Birds, Frogs, Crickets, and Dogs, or as one subscriber called it, the Critters Concert in April. And hearing Allegri's completely otherworldly Miserere in May at Fourth Presbyterian Church downtown and Saints Faith, Hope, and Charity Catholic Church in Winnetka. I'll see you at the upcoming concerts, I hope, and please come along next season. Thank you so much.